Everybody, thanks for dropping by. This is Ian with the garage rock band Rail City that always has all kinds of free music and stuff like that. And I hope you're having a great December. I am a fan of Tidal myself for my music streaming needs. Their staff, I'm kind of a music snob. I used to work at a radio station, and their staff actually puts together really good, like professional playlists about different eras and things like that. So I'm personally a Tidal guy, not a Spotify guy or any of the other stuff. I think Apple has something out now. But anyway, I logged on to my Tidal today and there was no new stuff. So that can only mean one thing. It's the end of the year and new music releases have finally slowed to a trickle. So I decided I'm finally gonna. I've never done a video like this. So I don't know if anybody will actually find it, if it's like searchable, or if anybody actually gives a damn about what I have to say. If you don't, that's probably for the best. But I did used to work in radio, so I do know a little bit about music, and I think I've got a pretty good opinion on things. But anyway, I was going to do a year-end best of albums list. I think I'm going to limit it to the indie and alternative rock genres, just because that's like my comfort zone. I think I can give the best commentary there, but certainly many great, just crushingly good albums released this year. This was a great year for music, 2016, and I'm sure 2017 is poised to one up 2016. But for now, let's do a little recap. I'm going to go through my 10 most favoritist albums of 2016. Something to keep in mind as I go through this is that there's limited objectivity to this list. I guess I didn't even try to be that objective. Yeah, calling this a best of 2016 countdown is kind of just a clickbait title. These are really just 10 albums that I really liked in 2016 and were very, very meaningful and influential for me. I was very moved by them, and I found myself listening to them again and again and again and again. I don't think, just personally, I don't think it's possible for anybody to individually come up with a completely objective, personally unbiased top 10 list. When I was in radio, we used to get together as a group sometimes, me and some of the other staff, and come up with best of lists. And I thought those were pretty objective, like different people putting up their top 10 albums and kind of compromising with other people. And then you came out with like a really refined list. But I feel like you really need a group to do something like that. So I'm just completely going off the stuff that resonated with me this year. And if there's anything I left out, leave it in the comments. Maybe it just barely missed my list, or maybe I don't even know about it, and I'd love to hear about it. So in the comments, let me know what your top 10 is, and we'll go through my top 10 right now. Coming in at numero DA's number 10 is Gary Wilson. Mr. Gary Wilson. Title of the album is Friday Night with Gary Wilson. Every Gary Wilson album sounds the same, and that's not at all a bad thing, because if there's one thing Gary Wilson does well, it's being Gary Wilson. He's a keyboardist, if I'm not mistaken. He's kind of creepy. He sings about like the same 5 or 6 things over and over, the same 5 or 6 girls and phrases and shit like that. So he has a couple motifs that he just kind of spins around over and over and over in all of his songs. And once again, his 2016 album, Friday Night with Gary Wilson, is no exception. But I do think since his comeback in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, he released one album in 1978, if I'm not mistaken. You Think You Know Me, I think it's called. Beck name dropped it in the early 90s on Odelay, if I'm not mistaken. And he, over the course of 25, 30 years, he gained a cult following, and then he made kind of a comeback in the early 2000s. Started releasing like self-recorded music again. And his style ever since the early 2000s has been pretty much unchanged. Just him making self-orchestrated, very DIY pop songs with usually really creepy titles, but when you actually listen to them, they're very innocent and very catchy, and they are actually, I think, underneath it all, really kind of creepy and from the mind of somebody who's a pretty strange guy. But all that slides very easily underneath the pop veneer that Gary Wilson gives his music. But anyway, as far as his 2016 release, it was on Cleopatra Records. That's a great label. They're a goth label. I grew up listening to a box set called the Goth Box that was on Cleopatra Records. But I think his 2006, Gary Wilson's 2016 album is his most realized work to date. All the songs are really, really catchy. Tracks two, track two on any album is usually the single. And the next to last track, I think it's called You Made Me Feel My Misery. Yeah, cheery stuff. Uh, Both very, very catchy. I think some of the best, if not the best hooks that he's ever come up with. And, baby steps sounds like a bad thing, I guess, but every Gary Wilson album, it seems like he presses who he is, and he's able to get across to the listener who he is just a little bit better each time. And I think this year's album is the best he's done. It's also the creepiest title. It's also the creepiest album cover that he's ever had. Something else I wanted to mention about this list is this is mainly bands that had some major, even if it's a minor major label, some sort of label backing, and we're on streaming sites and stuff like that. So just try to keep that in mind. There's a lot of great independent artists out there that didn't make this list just because, frankly, there's too many lists too. Some are prodigiously good and eventually they get signed by labels, but this is just going by off label releases. But anyway, number 9 is a band from New York called Bueno. Title of the album is Illuminate Your Room. I actually learned about Bueno when me and my band were spamming different venues in the area to play with. And Bueno was playing at, what's it called? Songbird Cafe in DC. We tried to get an opening slot for them. It didn't work out. I gotta say, the venue, I don't know what the fuck they were thinking, because the first girl who went on, I'm not saying she was bad or anything, but she was trying to be like Flying Lotus or something, and she was opening for New York, like, early 70s style rock band. The people weren't feeling it at all, myself included. I just kind of sat in the corner with my head in my hands. Not really. Figuratively speaking. But yeah, so I saw Bueno at Songbird Cafe. They were great. They're a lot younger than I thought they were. All really nice guys. Their singer is great. He's just a vocalist. Really good at keeping the crowd entertained. When they played live, he did like a kind of poetry thing, and the band dropped out. It was a really nice, I guess, variation in their live set. I really like that when bands, can go from a loud jam to like everybody dropping out and just doing a spoken word thing. That's exactly what they did. And their lead guitarist and saxophonist is a total badass. Yeah, I saw him going out the door and clapped him on the shoulder. And I was like, "You are the man!" And he was so modest about it, but he's the fucking man. But yeah, Bueno's, I think, debut album, Illuminate Your Room, all around just very, very funky, very much in the vein of Jonathan Richman. Jonathan Richman has always been a little too cutesy for me. Bueno have a little bit more swagger and like coolness to them. Not as silly, I guess, as Jonathan Richman. And of course, the Velvet Underground is a big influence for Bueno as well. Their album is like no frills rock and roll. It's got that like millennial slacker vibe to it though, as far as the lyrics and stuff like that go. People are into fiddler and bands like that. I think if you want like a lower tempo fiddler, Bueno is a great direction to go in. And their debut album, Illuminate Your Room, is a very, very strong showing. I'd highly recommend checking them out. Coming in at number 8 on the top 10 Indian alternative list is Male Bonding. Title of their album is Headache. I've never been a big Male Bonding fan, actually. Their first album, I think it was their second. It got Pitchfork Best New Music. I don't really keep up with Pitchfork anymore. And I really mean that. Yeah, not a closet Pitchfork guy. But, back in the day when I was in radio, I did keep up with their stuff. Try to keep up with the trends and shit like that. But I think it was their second album that got Pitchfork Best New Music. And they've kind of been riding on that wave ever since. Though they've, at least critically, never managed to equal, as far as critical appraisal and shit like that, they've never managed to equal that album that really got them on like people's radars. But I gotta say, I think their album Headache this year is their best album yet. I think it has the best guitar riffs of any album I heard this year. Whether it be the riffs themselves, the tempo at which they're done, the tightness of the band all together, the guitar effects and shit like that. Headache really drives home hard. It's the sort of album where you can't just play it as background music. It just like magnetically, like turns your ear to metal or something, and it's a magnet. It just like starts to pull you across the room. Very, very tight, big, squirmy mutant riffs from Male Bonding. And coming in at number 8, I think their most recent album is just pretty much impossible to ignore. Really, really great. Number 7, Keno Kimono, I think her name is. Is that right? Yep. Betas for Sissies on the guy from Waves' Ghost Ramp record label. I had no idea who Keno Kimono was before her album came out, but as soon as I listened to it, it's a pretty special thing. Very hip and fresh, just like you would expect from an artist backed by the guy from Waves. Waves are still pretty much like the hipster rock band to be reckoned with all these years later, I think. But anyway, it's not about them. It's about Keno Kimono, and she's pretty amazing. She does a really good job of deriving a lot of older bands, like really edgier, heavier, less friendly, like no wave and post-punk bands from the 80s. She has that kind of slammy guitar sound and just kind of abrasiveness to her music. She also recalls Glenn Branca a little bit, I think, just the way that her guitars are layered and how her songs kind of spin in a circle, and she does little variations that, over the course of 3 minutes take her kind of spinning from point A to point B ever so slowly and with every little detail that changes in what she's doing. Despite, I guess, the circuitous nature of her music, she does have really great choruses too. She writes really good, her music doesn't completely shun the pop music aesthetic. It's very, very catchy and very user-friendly, despite its kind of grainy 80s artists that I think it pays tribute to. But despite it deriving all those old artists, it's a very hip sounding album. It sounds like something you could skateboard to or something. And a lot of the girl artists I heard this year, like Angel Olsen, I can't remember the other one, Mitski, I think her name is. I thought their music was really, really wimpy. I couldn't get on board with it. They write music about music, which is like my ultimate pet peeve, like writing a song about writing a song. And they really just wear their heart on their sleeve and shit like that, and not even in a way that's touching, in my opinion. It was all just kind of like TMI. But it's just my personal preference, I guess. People praised Angel Olsen and Mitski this year. I couldn't get into them at all. Like, just totally not my thing. Keno Kimono, total badass. Best female album this year, I think. Once you hear her album, it's definitely like nothing you've ever heard. Coming in at number 6, Cass McCombs, Mangy Love. He was just on the Ellen DeGeneres show like 2 weeks ago, and I think that really speaks volumes about how far he's come within the past 5 or 6 years or so. I saw him in 2011 for the very first time at the Auto Bar in Baltimore, and it was really cool. Me and my girlfriend, it was like the second date we ever went on, and we're engaged now, so that's pretty cool. But when his band was warming up in 2011 at the Auto Bar in Baltimore, the door was like cracked, and we heard them on the other side. So we were like, "Hey, is the show going on?" We were way early, and we went inside, and we got to watch them sound check, and it was really cool. They let us do that. But in between them kind of jamming out, I went up to the stage, and I was like, "Hey, man, I'm really looking forward to the show tonight. I really like your music." And Cass McCombs is a very if he was a turtle, he doesn't come out of his shell very much. He's very, I think, reticent is the right word. Yeah, I don't know, but he's not a people person, which is fine. I'm not really either, but and then after the show at Auto Bar, he wasn't selling any merch at all. They were selling like a record and a poster, which I got the poster. It's a pretty cool poster. But t-shirts and all that stuff, it seemed he was a little bit like too cool for that. He didn't want to merchandise himself. Compare that with nowadays when you go to his shows, and he's got like 6 different kinds of t-shirts, merch everywhere. When he plays on stage, he's smiling, he jams out, he's cracking jokes. It wasn't all that way. He used to want, like back in 2011, he wanted all the lights turned off. It was a very like, almost like you were in church or something when you were watching him play. Very somber experience. Nowadays, it's more like, I don't know, it's more like a jam band almost. Yeah, he switches his band up every so often, and I saw him on the Mangy Love tour, and it's more of a jazz oriented band. They had a keyboardist with like an old, expensive, looked like it was going to break at any second synth. So he was doing like a lot of Herbie Hancock shit and stuff like that, and they did some Cass McCombs classics and drug them out for 10, 15 minutes. But kind of going along with that, his new album Mangy Love is very jazzy. What's that band? It's like Weather Service or Weather Patrol or something like that. Yeah, anyway, like 1970s and 1980s instrumental jazz, those are definitely the touch points for his most recent album. And even though it's a pretty big departure from even his most recent album, the Big Wheel one, which was no bones about it, like Neil Young like folk album, him sliding into like a jazz sound, it seems very, very natural. He's very, very good at it, and he does a good job of imbibing his new jazzier sound with the things that have made Cass McCombs all along. Like the hip, kind of cryptic, like almost beatnik like poetic lyrics, the shifting song structures, and of course kind of a pop acumen. Every Cass McCombs album definitely always has a couple songs that really get stuck in your head and you find yourself humming the next day. So some people will fault him for being on the Ellen Show. I say good for him. His music is very compatible for the masses. His message is always a good one. He was, putting his neck out for Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, before anybody else was. And there's so many good tidbits in his songs. Like he's a smart guy, and he sticks with his guns, as he actually says in some of his lyrics. And I think the more of his music reaches the masses, the better for him and the better for all of us. Great album this year. Number 6 on Lollipop Records, which is a great label for fun, like 60s styled pop. Nothing that's gonna necessarily change the world or change your life, just make you feel good. But one of their best bands nowadays is a band called Adult Books. Album is called Running from the Blows. A lot of really great songs on it. A good balance of like modern slacker rock, kind of California surf punk or surf pop, and some like mid '80s post punk in there too, especially with the chorusing effects and the bass lines and stuff like that. Very reminiscent of bands like the Chameleons UK, The Cure, and stuff like that. But they do love their surf drums. So those two things on the Adult Books album do a really good job of evening each other out. Like the mopier Cure side of things with the surfier California artist stuff going on. And I think they're actually from California, so I guess that explains that. But the first 5 tracks on this album are all great. Any one of them could be a hit single, in my opinion. Great lyrics, guitar riffs, lyrics that are easy to sympathize with for anybody, I think. And then Suburban Girlfriend, which is one of those 5 tracks, was the big single from the album. They did a music video. Yeah, it's tough to beat Suburban Girlfriend. That is definitely, in my opinion, one of the top 5 best like pop songs of the year. Really, really tough to beat. And definitely look forward to hearing more from Adult Books in the future. Amazing band. Once again, I think they're from California. The one criticism I guess I do have about the album is I actually didn't like the bass lines that much. On the first 5 tracks, everything else is so good. The vocals, the guitar riffs, the keyboard, that it's cool for the bass to just set in the background. But on some of the later, more jammy, longer tracks, the bass takes center stage a little bit more, and the bass lines are kind of boring in my opinion. I don't know if the bassist did them or the guitarist. It sounds like a guitarist who doesn't play bass did them, and he was just being as simple as possible because he's not around the bass that much. But the bass lines toward end of the album were a little bit boring. But all in all, I definitely found myself listening to adult books this year, over and over. Really great album to drive around to. Coming in at number 5, a band out of Australia called the Goon Sax. I have no idea what a Goon Sax is. Title of the album is Up to Anything. Goon Sax are a 3-piece from Australia. 1 girl, 2 guys, and one of the guys is actually, if I'm not mistaken, the son of the guy from the Go-Betweens. The Go-Betweens are one of the most famous kind of quirky guitar pop bands from the 80s and 90s. They were always a little bit too clever for me personally. Like in college, I had a friend who was crazy about the magnetic fields and Stephen Merritt, and I just could never quite get into him because he was too nuanced and almost like more like a writer than a musician in how he wrote lyrics and things like that. Just very clever, and you could really pick his lyrics apart. Like you couldn't take them at face value too often. They were kind of like a puzzle box. And that's kind of how the Go-Betweens always were for me as well. But the Goon Sax are a very simple band, and I like them a lot for that. They never overcomplicate things. All their lyrics sound like something you could like take out of a diary. All very earnest and about stuff that everybody either thinks about or feels or something on a day-to-day basis. Their music itself is very simple as well. Very much styled like almost like the Velvet Underground's. Not a lot of fast like you hear the Velvet Underground do a lot live on some of their older stuff. But just pounding the same 2 or 3 chords for all they're worth over and over, whether it be on acoustic or a nice jangly guitar. Lots of simple drum rhythms, simple bass lines, and they all serve as a really great palatable backdrop for what the songs are really about, which is the singer definitely like lays it all out there in a way that's very, very human and very easy to sympathize with. Just like any other album that I've gone over so far, it's definitely one that I found myself like listening to over and over and over. Coming in at number 4, you probably knew this one was coming. David Bowie, Blackstar. David Bowie died this year, which is certainly tragic, but the inclusion of this album on this list isn't just because he died out of respect or anything like that. It's a truly, truly great album from a truly great guy. There's a book I have by Neil Strauss, the guy who did The Game, but it's all interviews that he did with different artists for different magazines like Esquire and Rolling Stone and all that shit throughout his career, Maxim. But I'll never forget in his interview with Trent Reznor says that every single star that Trent Reznor ever met after he was famous totally shattered his opinion of them. Like, he grew up listening to Prince. He said Prince was a total dick, although it sucks that Prince died this year too. But he said David Bowie was the only person that he met who was just really warm and down to earth and a pleasant person to be around all around. But David Bowie, a lot of people really focus, rightfully so, on his work in the 60s and 70s because of just how groundbreaking it was. I think one of the coolest descriptions I ever heard of David Bowie was he was racing neck and neck with the Beatles creatively, but he was just one guy and they were 4. So he's really one of the most powerful and self-realized solo artists ever. He was taking on whole bands with just his raw personal creativity and vision for the type of music that he wanted to make. But what people don't tend to focus on is his output in the 80s and the 90s. It's not as great. He was definitely still doing the invent himself thing, but the things that he was inventing himself into either just didn't resonate with people, weren't that interesting, or it seemed like he was trying to invent himself to go along with the times. Whereas a lot of times, in the 60s and 70s, it was like he would invent himself, and what he turned himself into would influence the music and the art world around him, which is really kind of the mystique that David Bowie has always had. But, with that said, there was no guarantee. It's almost like a coin toss whether David Bowie's last album, as it turned out to be, would be any good or something that would go down in the rock and roll archives. And it is an absolutely amazing album. It's not too long. It's also not too short. It's very, very focused. It is a very spiritual album. It's bleak, I guess, and kind of spooky, but it's also a hopeful album. And it really brings out all of David Bowie's best qualities. His openness as an artist. He tries out a lot of like international styles throughout the course of the album. The single from it is almost 10 minutes long, so that's essentially him putting up the finger to radio formatting. He's David Bowie. He'll do whatever he wants. And it turns out the 10 minutes are fully justified. Even the longer tracks on the album are really fascinating in the different movements they go through. His cast of musicians that he, hired, or his friends for the album, are all sound very in sync and very on the same page creatively. He almost goes into like Scott Walker territory at points, like Tilt and The Drift. Really, really spooky. But Scott Walker just totally fell off the deep end into like the abyss with stuff like that, and he's still there. David Bowie still keeps everything grounded in the kind of pop, all-inclusive charm that his music has always had. I think that's what a lot of people like about the Berlin Trio, is that it's still rock music, but there's a lot of artistry and things attached to it. It's not like snobby art. It's like music that you can take at face value, or you can read into it if you want. And his last album, Blackstar, is certainly no exception. Even though it's a pretty short album, it guarantees hours and hours of repeat listening, whether it be at your stereo, like scratching your chin trying to think about the meaning of what he's saying, or just chilling out in the bathtub with a bunch of, I don't know, scented candles on or something, just trying to relax and feeling like you're in another dimension or something like that. So it's great that David Bowie had a very powerful last showing. Definitely is up there with the best stuff that he's ever done. Blackstar. Coming in at number 3, my commentary on this album probably won't do it justice because I'm not the most well-educated on the artist or what his career creatively has looked like. But Brendan Canning, album is Home Wrecking Years. I think Brendan Canning was a member of Broken Social Scene. Even though Broken Social Scene are a great band, I think that's where, what's her name? That lady who used to have all kinds of hits. Feist. I think Feist was in Broken Social Scene. But everybody in college who was into Broken Social Scene were all kind of annoying, so that was like their calling card, and what they always talked about was Broken Social Scene, so I never quite got into them, even though I didn't not like their music per se. But Brendan Canning, it may be the impetus, I think that's the right word, the thing that makes me revisit Broken Social Scene, because his album this year was really amazing, a really colorful, it makes you feel like you're just like floating over the fields in the sunshine type of album. But despite that kind of wistfulness, it has a lot of depth. A couple of songs on it, the choruses and the hooks, they're just absolutely irresistible, like candy just flowing into your ears. But you don't. The sugar rush doesn't let you down. Like, it just keeps going and going and going throughout the album. And the last track is absolutely crazy. Like, after the, like flying on a magic carpet journey that the whole album takes you through, you think it has to come down at some point, and the last song just takes you right up to the moon. Just an amazing pop song. I really need to research him more and get into his other stuff, but I didn't have an opportunity this year because I was playing his 2016 album on repeat like a million times. Alright, so I just got done listening to all the bullshit that I've been spouting off, and I'm all charged up and ready to go for the final 2, and these are 2 amazing, maybe life-changing albums for me. Definitely up there with my favorite listens ever. Number 2 is Violent Soho. They released an album on Side One Dummy Records this year called Waco, and it's their best album ever. I had never heard of them before this album. I think there's a venue in DC called DC9, which I try to keep up with the bands on their calendar. For every 10 bands that come through, I'll usually find one that I at least like. and occasionally one that I really, really like that I wouldn't have found out otherwise. But yeah, that's how I found out about Violent Soho. They were first signed to Thurston Moore's record label. They have one big hit. It's like a huge jock jam. Yeah, like the biggest like beer chugging jock jam ever. I think it's called Covered in Chrome. But that song's great and everything. And when I saw them at DC9, people certainly went fucking batshit about that song. Yeah, I went to a Halloween party at Autobar in Baltimore, and a band called Natural Velvet out of Baltimore played. And I was just kind of talking with the girl in Natural Velvet after. And I was like, yeah, sorry, I missed you guys at Violent Soho. I know you were the opener. I got there a little bit late. And I was like, Violent Soho was batshit, right? And she was like, yeah, I've never been at a show where the floor shook that much. And I don't remember the floor shaking. I more remember like, you know, a building with 9-foot ceilings and 5 people crowd surfing at once, and all the girls just running straight for the walls because, yeah, these huge guys just like, yeah, just obliterating each other. When, like I say, I think that song's called Covered in Chrome when that came on. But yeah, that was a crazy show. But despite all that, the band they were really nice guys. They said when we booked this show in DC, we fully expected 10 people to show up, and they were amazed that, yeah, I think it was probably 50, 60 people maybe showed up. But their new album Waco is their best album. Pretty much any song on it could be a single. Just string after string of great riffs and choruses. For people who have felt like the Deftones' output over the past, you know, however many years, 5-10 years, hasn't lived up to their glory days. I'm not saying Violent Soho equal the Deftones' you know, early output or even anything like the Deftones necessarily, but if you want that just visceral guitar music that makes you want to jump up and down, that the Deftones definitely encapsulated and made their calling card. Violent Soho, their most recent album, like, it gets you right up there with some of the Deftones' best moments, like Shut Up and Drive and all that stuff. But let's see, what else do I want to say about Waco? The title track is insane. I don't think they even played it at the show. They were playing a lot of the more like bratty songs. Violent Soho do bratty really, really well, and in a manner that, like, I don't think anybody can say no to. It's just so fist pumping and visceral and full of energy. And it's not like they're faking the energy. It's just there. But the title track Waco, I flew to Paris this year, and the flight back was a bitch. But I listened to the title track like 10 times or something on repeat. It's just so like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a pop song at heart, I guess, and I guess maybe as you've watched this video, you might realize that I like pop music a lot. But just really slithery and gets all up in your brain and stuff. I don't think anybody does exactly what they're doing nowadays. It's a great cross between, you know, your average side one dummy band that has that kind of like Vans Warped Tour sound, and more, but they also have more of like a hip kind of slacker rock edge to their music. So yeah, not a single bad track on that whole album. Great ballads, great mosh songs, great pump your fist songs, great sing-along songs. It's all there on their album Waco. And what else did I want to say? Something important. Oh yeah, the band that opened for them out of Chicago called Meatwave, they were really good too. Like, I actually probably had more, I enjoyed seeing them more than Violent Soho. They were really tight and visceral, and they were really nice guys too. Like, I bought one of their shirts at the end of the show. The Meatwave guy bought one of their shirts because I didn't have enough money for Violent Soho stuff. I guess they shipped all that shit all the way from Australia, and they had a little bit of a premium on it. But the Meatwave guy, he was like, you could tell he was genuinely happy to see me when people were crowding over to the Violent Soho booth. He was like, "Hey man, what's going on?" And yeah, just a really, really nice band all around. Even if they hadn't been super nice, like I say, their set absolutely crushed. I think their most recent album was out in 2015, so not eligible for this list, but Meatwave are a great band, and Violent Soho definitely know how to bring the heat, whether it be live or on their most recent album. And we finally made it there. Thanks for sticking with me. The number one indie alternative album that was backed by a major label this year. In this case, secretly Canadian. I'm actually usually not a big fan of their stuff. This may be the first album they've ever put out that I was a big fan of. But Alex Cameron, Jumpin' the Shark. 8 tracks of pure, like, synthwave, singer-songwritery, confessional pop goodness. Maybe the best that I've ever heard. I'm a big John Moss fan, but John Moss he's a little snobby. Like, he's definitely an artiste, and he tries to kind of bend or break the boundaries of pop or synth pop music. Alex Cameron, very down-to-earth lyricist. Kind of like I was talking about the Goon Sax. He takes just simple confessional lyrics that almost anybody can relate to and just stretches them as far as he can. So I saw him live this year in a basement in Baltimore, a basement of a pizza restaurant, and it was a great show. The guy who opened for him, you should check out too, artist named Captain Murphy in Baltimore. He's an interesting DIY recording guy. I really liked his stuff. But Alex Cameron, this album only has 8 tracks. They're about 3 or 4 minutes each, if that. So he did a lot of talking in between songs. It was him and one other guy, and the other guy played saxophone. But anyway, hearing him talk and tell stories in between songs, it kind of confirmed a suspicion that I had, that I think he primarily considers himself like a storyteller as much as he is, if not more than he is, a musician. He likes to, with every song, almost like put on a mask and look at the world from somebody else's point of view, and he really gets to the core and a really like emotive core of that person and just relays it to you full force, all within the course of 2 or 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and all within like a pop music package that's really easy to digest and get stuck in your head for like days. Every song on here is amazing. He omitted 2 for his live set, and I don't know why. All these are great songs. I really like the first song though, Happy Ending, and then the comeback is really amazing. The refrain that he kind of slips into. But I didn't even think I was that big of a story song or character artist guy. There's an artist from the 90s and 2000s called Momus, real name Nick Curry. He was actually a writer for Wired Magazine. But his whole thing was telling stories, and in one case he actually got sued into poverty because he had a song about what was it? Wendy Carlos building a time machine and going into the past to fuck Walter Carlos. But Momus was a very abrasive like singer who would take on all these abrasive characters in his songs, usually to be cute or offensive or something. Alex Cameron isn't like that. Like the characters in his songs are all very easy to sympathize with and are people that you wish you could meet. And they're all very tragic characters, so they're also people that you wish you could help out. And the problems they have are problems that you feel like all people have or you have sometimes. So even though this album I think is just over 30 minutes long, I've found myself listening to it again and again and again, and I always find something new in it. As far as musicianship goes, Alex Cameron I think is a keyboardist, and he likes to loop keyboards. He has a really good ear for just really heady keyboard riffs, and I'm a big Ministry guy. I like the band Ministry. Ministry are all about loops, but sometimes the stuff they loop isn't that good, or over the course of 8 minutes it really drives itself into the ground. Alex Cameron, the stuff he loops, very heady, keyboard riffs that you just want to keep playing over and over and over, almost like really good house music in a club or something, even though it's not even vaguely like that, but the same sort of thing, like just looping around the same idea over and over because it's such a great idea. And then he gradually develops his songs as they go on, and almost all of them have some kind of big climax, but it never feels gaudy. The progression to the climax in his songs is always very natural, very believable, and as I've been saying, just really, really great music to sympathize with, and yeah, just really, really gets across to you and feels personal. When you listen to this album, it feels like an album that you've heard before, that you kind of hold near and dear to yourself. And the more you listen to it, it becomes that album. So I'm really looking forward to them putting out more stuff in the future. During the concert, Alex Cameron, I don't know, I guess it was a little bit rude, but he seemed a little bit like not happy with the amount of people that showed up. He said he was driving to the venue and he saw a big rock hall and he was like, I want to fill that rock hall. But I hope he is an ambitious guy and he puts out more stuff. He's a great songwriter, and I don't know if I already said this, but when he played live, he was with a saxophonist. So I don't know how much his music is a joint effort. The guy he was with was a very good saxophonist, and yeah, they were both really nice Australian dudes all around. Really nice Australian record. Definitely my top of the year. Well, yeah. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and all that good stuff. I hope that you've enjoyed the music that's come to fruition in 2016 as much as I have. Not just in the genres that I covered, but in many other genres. This year I think there was especially a lot of great hip-hop albums. Though, you know, being a Tidal listener, a company that's owned by Jay-Z, I think a little bit of hip-hop is definitely put in the spotlight on the Tidal website, so I've had a lot of exposure to it. But if there's any albums you really like this year, just leave them in the comments. Maybe I heard about them, maybe I didn't. Yeah, Ian with Rail City. Once again, hope you had a great year. I'll catch you soon.